Hello, everyone, and welcome back to MT10 News Vote 2020.
As the night goes on, more numbers are coming in. Reporter Jonas Saich and Dr. Ken Blake have the latest results.
And as the country sees record voter turnout, reporter Dave Stripling takes a look at how voter suppression could explain these statistics.
All that and more is coming up. MT10 News Vote 2020 starts right now.
From Studio One on the campus of Middle Tennessee State University, it's MT10's coverage of the 2020 election.
Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Jonathan House.
And I'm Terica Black. Welcome to MT10 News Vote 2020. Data reporter Jonas Saich and our data analysis Dr. Ken Blake joins us now for the latest poll results.
We are now 4 hours deep into election night, and it's not getting any clearer. Dr. Blake, how are you holding up back there?
I'm ready for a nap.
I think we both are, but we've still got a couple hours to go for this, and we'll start with how it's looking right now. Joe Biden is now leading the popular vote with 49.8%, 48.6% going to Trump. Biden having over 1 million votes, yet as more battleground states are leaning Republican, Dr. Blake, how are you thinking this is going to turn out? Could this be similar to 2016, where again, the popular vote winner doesn't necessarily win the election?
It's certainly a possibility. What has to happen here for Joe Biden is he really needs to hold on to the leads he currently has in Arizona, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Maine. And then pick up somebody else on the map. And, Pennsylvania would certainly do it for him. But we'll see. As far as Trump, he needs to hold on again to his current leads in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And again, pick up somebody else. In that scenario, if you give each of the candidates those states, Biden has 6 ways to win. He has to pick up Iowa or Nevada, and Trump has to pick up. He could pick up. He would have to win Iowa and Nevada both. So it could come down to those two.
Not two states that have a whole lot of electoral votes, but carry a lot more weight going in later tonight. As you see, we have our presidential election update. This was updated about 30 or so minutes ago. And keep in mind, we came up here, updated this map about 10 minutes ago, back on our 10 p.m., and California was reported and then called, just like that. So these results are coming in quicker and quicker by the minute. And as you can see, 209 as a result of victories from Washington, Oregon, and California. They still need a few more. And as you mentioned, Dr. Blake, some of those key states, Nevada, Iowa, Minnesota, 2 of those Biden is leading in Arizona as well. But you also have Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, all of which could definitely go towards Trump. If you take a look at Florida, here are the new updates. It's generally stayed around 4%, 5.6 million votes for Trump compared to 5.25 for Biden. We talked about it earlier, Dr. Blake, Florida not having much of a chance. Do you see any increase for a comeback for Biden, or is this more than likely going to stay in Trump's favor?
I think Florida is probably going to stay in Trump's column. Let's see. The New York Times is giving Trump about a 95% chance of winning Florida right now. North Carolina and Georgia are a little bit lower. Trump is still favored to win those, but not as strongly as he is to win Florida.
And in Texas, similar result over there. Trump with 52%, Biden with 46.7%, 5.3 million votes for Trump, 4.7 for Biden. We've seen a lot of potential shifts in Texas, starting with the 2018 midterms, talking about Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. That was a little closer than some might expect. Did that Senate election have anything to do with what people projected as Texas being one of the biggest, if not the biggest, flippers coming into tonight?
I think there was some hope on the part of the Democrats that they would be able to take advantage of changing demographics in Texas. And that certainly has made the race close. It remains to be seen whether it's going to be close enough to land in the Democratic column.
And Texas, one of the big states to watch out for. Pennsylvania as well. Early on, Pennsylvania was about a 30 to 40 point difference in favor of Biden, but they counted a lot more early ballots which were in favor of the Democrats. Now you're seeing on this map here, Trump is leading by 15 points. Trump had that around the same margin in the 2016 election. He does not look to be slowing down. 600,000 votes in Pennsylvania. As that goes along, under 40% still reporting. So we're going to have to take a look at that closer to midnight if we want to see any results changing. Now, we've talked a lot about the federal. It's time to get into the Senate. 45 in Republican, 44 in Democrat. Gray doesn't mean they're all being decided. Some of them already have Senate elections that were held in 2018 and are not being currently in the 2020 election. You can see one of the biggest, the two that have flipped were Alabama and Colorado. Those have been the two states that have flipped, one in favor of the Democrats, one in favor of the Republicans. Dr. Blake, how important is it for Democrats to at least control the Senate?
I think for Democrats, it's extremely important. Keep in mind, there's also the Georgia special Senate race, which will go to a runoff between Republican Kelly Loeffler and Democrat Raphael Warnock. So we'll have to wait on that one as well. But certainly, if Democrats are going to advance their agenda, especially if Donald Trump remains in the White House, they're going to have the Senate as well as the House.
I don't know if you know the last time that a re-election has ended in the winning side, or at least the White House, the person controlling the White House is the president, taking the Senate. But for Republicans, this has to be a huge win if they can at least get a 50-50 balance or keep control in the Senate, shouldn't it?
Yes, they're certainly hoping to maintain control of the Senate. That would essentially deliver continue for another at least 2 years the current status quo of a Republican White House and Senate and a Democratic House. But again, we'll have to wait and see. It's neck and neck at the moment.
Talking about waiting and seeing, what are some of the biggest Senate elections or races? I know you talked about Georgia. What are some other ones that could come down to the wire, not only for the Democrats, but for the Republicans to try and flip some seats?
Well, a number of them are close. North Carolina is very close right now, 48 to 47%. The Republican leading there. Let's see, who else do we have here? Minnesota, the Democrats actually doing quite well, not so close there. Let's see. Who's close? It looks like generally the close Senate races are in the Southeast, kind of where you would expect them to be. North Carolina and well, Georgia's not so close. It looks like the Republican is on the way to winning there. So I'd say North Carolina is probably still the main battleground there.
And North Carolina was a early state to watch early on at the 7 to 8 p.m. hours where Joe Biden had that lead. Of course, early mail-in voting had something to do with that. Now North Carolina in Trump territory in terms of where those electoral votes can go. 11 seats remaining in the Senate, 44 for the Democrats. They need something to get over the 50 so they can have a portion. If they get the control of the House and Senate, even if Trump is in office, they are at least going to limit what those Republicans might be able to do. Jonathan, Terica?
Felons in Tennessee not only lose their right to vote, most lose it even after they've served their time. Some say this is a form of voter suppression, and many are fighting for felons' rights to vote. Dave Stripling has more.
Felon disenfranchisement is the practice of restricting the voting rights of people convicted of felonies. That means if you're a felon, you can't vote. It's been around since the origins of democracy, as far back as ancient Rome and Greece. In medieval Europe, it was called civil death. European settlers brought these voter disenfranchisement laws with them to the New World, but they remained rarely enforced until 1865.
After the Civil War, these laws were used in many southern states as part of a deliberate campaign to deny the newly freed African Americans the right to vote.
Dr. Pippa Holloway, professor of history at the University of Richmond, author of Living in Infamy, Felon Disenfranchisement and the History history of American citizenship, says that felon disenfranchisement laws are being used for many of the same reasons in 2020, to keep African Americans from voting.
It's certainly not a coincidence that the partisan and racial work that these laws did in the 19th century are still happening in the 21st century, and particularly here in Tennessee.
Currently, 6.1 million Americans cannot vote due to a felony conviction, a dramatic increase since 1976, according to the Sentencing Project, a nonprofit organization working to reduce that number. That's 1 in 13 black voters, over 20% of African American voters in Tennessee.
So anyone who commits a felony in the state of Tennessee since 1981 faces a permanent, lifelong penalty of losing the right to vote.
While many states have passed laws to restore voting rights for felons after they've served their sentences, Tennessee has not.
So nationally, we're moving in the right direction. Most of the worst states are moving in the right direction. And Tennessee, once again, stands alone as doing nothing to expand the voting rights of people with felony convictions and having an extremely high number of people paying this price. And in fact, we're the worst state in the country with regard to the impact of felon disfranchisement on African American voters.
While several Tennessee lawmakers of both parties have tried to pass laws restoring voting rights to felons, nothing major has passed in recent years. Why is this? Professor Cris of the Sentencing Project says political fear plays a huge part.
I've witnessed this occurring where there will be a legislative debate and the Democrats will be very strong for reenfranchisement, but then somebody said, well, what about Charles Manson, or what about a sex offender or someone who commits treason? And then, they started to say, well, I don't want that in my campaign literature. I don't want to go back home to my district and have to explain why I did this nice thing for a serial killer or something.
The reality is that Tennessee is a deep red state. We have a supermajority of Republicans in the Tennessee legislature and very little interest among those legislators, among the deep red Republican legislators in Tennessee, to change the law.
So until there's a political will to change things in Tennessee, the volunteer state will remain one of the worst states for felon voter disenfranchisement. Dave Stripling, MT10 News.
Tennessee has seen its voter demographics change and shift significantly since the 2008 election. Reporter Marshall Maxwell tells us more.
Census data. Between 2009 and 2019, Tennessee's population grew by almost 8% compared to nationwide growth of just over 6%. With this growth in population comes a shift in the demographics of voters in Tennessee and across the nation. Dr. Gretchen Weber, a sociology professor at MTSU, explains some of the demographic shifts we've seen.
And we also see some growth in Hispanic eligible voters in different states, particularly like Florida, Arizona, Nevada. And so that changes demographics depending on the state.
Many experts believe that this election will have the highest voter turnout since the 1908 election. According to the Associated Press, over 100 million Americans voted early in this election, which represents about 73% of voter turnout in the 2016 presidential election.
But interestingly, you see differences across country of origin. So while Hispanics may lean Democratic, when you dig deeper, for example, like a majority of Cuban Americans lean Republican. And of course, the majority of the majority of Cuban Americans live in Florida. And so that impacts Florida, which of course is another battleground state.
Reporting for MT10 News, this is Marshall Maxwell.
Joe Biden's campaign funds topple President Trump's funds while the president fell behind throughout this presidential campaign. In September, Biden was able to raise over $170 million, while Trump was only able to raise over $63 million. Trump nearly had $190 million more in the bank when Biden emerged as the presumptive Democratic nominee. Biden has since almost tripled the amount in the beginning of October. Biden's campaign had over $400 million in the bank, while Trump's campaign had just over $250 million. Biden surpassed Trump in funding on August 11th when he announced Kamala Harris as his choice for vice president.
And Joe Biden's campaign has been given more money from the wealthiest and educated zip codes than President Trump's. They raised almost $500 million from the wealthiest households with an income of over $100,000, while Trump's campaign raised over $150 million from wealthy donors. Biden also received more donations from less wealthy households as his campaign raised almost $600 million. From educated voters, Biden raised $400 million from donors who live in highly educated zip codes. Trump only surpassed Biden's funding when he was raised over $600 million from less educated zip codes.
Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter were all used by Russians to persuade American voters with messages during the 2016 presidential election. Billions of dollars have been spent to calm down falsehoods and to improve their security policies. Facebook has implemented a war room working to identify efforts to destabilize the election. Twitter's strategy is to use algorithms and human analysts to find the network of bots spreading misinformation. YouTube has brought thousands of human reviewers to help improve their algorithms' performance.
Coming up next for our midnight final half-hour special, Tennessee is a red state, but how red?
And we'll have the latest updates on the elections that matter to you. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jonathan House.
And I'm Terica Black. We'll see you back here at midnight for our full half-hour show.